throw the ball back.
I was so tightly packed, my feet weren't even touching the ground. So I had no control over what I was doing or where I was going.
The fans were wrestling with the police, trying to make them aware of what was going on. People were dying, you know.
April 1989. Liverpool supporters prepared to make the 80-mile journey to Sheffield and the Hillsborough Stadium, where the FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest was to be played. One of the Liverpool fans making the journey that day was Kenny Holmes.
It was a lovely sunny day, so we decided to cut across the Peak District through Glossop and that. And we're having a laugh and a joke, had a few cans as you do, like, and we just, you know, really looking forward to the game.
For some, the journey had been slowed down and frustrated by roadworks along the way. Among the many supporters who were delayed was Stephen Bell. Each time, as we were stuck in the motorway, people were saying, oh, we're going to get there late, we're going to get there late. So by the time we actually reached Sheffield, and we parked, the coach was parked, everyone was aware that we were getting to the football match late, and it wasn't just us. There was quite a lot of coaches all seemed to turn up at once. Once I got off the coach, I just ran then, and I never stopped until I actually got on the ground.
Semi-finals are the most important games in the FA Cup, because if you get beat, then it's the worst feeling in the world. And if you win, there's such an elation because you're going to a cup final. So we were in very, very high spirits. We knew it was going to be a very entertaining game. And everybody was confident, and I'm sure Nottingham Forest were looking forward to this game as well.
The 24,000 Liverpool fans were to make for the north side of the stadium and the 23 turnstiles at the Leppings Lane entrance.
4 of us were walking up to the ground. We knew where to go. We'd been the previous year. When we got up to the top, we fully expected the queues to be there, and you know, just to wait a few minutes and then in we go. And when we got up to the actual turnstiles, it was just chaotic. It was just total disorder.
Everyone was saying they're not going to get all these in by 3 o'clock. It was about 20 minutes to 3:45 then. And there must have been, average guess, 3,000 or 4,000 people trying to get in.
The crowds had grown to such an extent outside Leppings Lane, the police now feared fans would get injured in the crush. To ease the pressure, they opened the large exit gates to let the crowd into the ground. It was to be a fateful decision.
I heard the policeman who was by this gate shout through to the steward on the other side, open the gate, and we have to let so many through, there's going to be an accident out there.
It was like a cork of a bottle. We all just got shoved in. It was absolutely chaotic. You couldn't get out because there was more supporters arriving from behind, and we just all sort of headed down the tunnel. Once you got in there, there was just no way out. Once you was in there, that was it.
With no one to direct them into the relatively empty side pens, everyone made for the central tunnel and pens 3 and 4.
As soon as you got to the end of the tunnel, I knew then there was something wrong. It was like as you hit the crowd, there wasn't that much room.
The crowd control barriers were not designed for such a vast influx of people, and the rigid perimeter fencing put up to stop fans running out onto the pitch had no emergency release system. The fans were trapped, and those at the front began to suffocate as they were crushed up against the steel mesh enclosure.
We got in, and the crowd coming behind and you instantly knew there was something wrong. I couldn't pull my arms up. My arms were by my side. I just couldn't move. It's just horrible.
I was leaning against this crowd barrier. I was getting pushed against it, and I was beginning to tilt over it, so it was cutting into my middle, and I was over. And usually you can push back and say, you know, get off and all the rest of it. But no matter how hard I pushed back, I just couldn't move them an inch. And the people behind me were saying to people behind them, stop pushing, we can't move. And at this time I was beginning to panic because I couldn't get off this bar. And with it pressing into my stomach, I was having difficulty breathing.
With no one stopping the fans pouring into the ground, the pressure continued to build in pens 3 and 4.
I was pushed onto the barrier and I went on my left, slightly onto my left side, and the sheer weight of numbers of people still pressing, I got pressed up against it and my ribs cracked.
At the other end of the stadium, arriving Nottingham Forest fans were unaware of the problems developing at the Leppings Lane end.
At this time it was so tightly packed, my feet weren't even touching the ground. So I had no control over what I was doing or where I was going.
People had by now started to climb over the side fences and into the adjoining pens to escape. Brian Doyle's exit, however, was barred by an older man.
I got hold of the man's arm, trying to get him on the fence. His eyes was like just wild staring. And I said, like, if I don't get out now, you know, that's the time I did become petrified of the crowd. That's what it was, petrified. So I ended up, like, putting my leg on him myself and jumping over, which I think about every day.
But before the match had even begun, people were already dying in the overcrowded pens.
These people I was standing with like 5 minutes before, singing and waiting in expectation for Liverpool to go and knock 5 past Nottingham Forest on that glorious sunny day. All of a sudden, these people had the life squoze out of them one by one.
At 3 o'clock, the match kicked off, with most people unaware of the tragedy unfolding only yards away. At the Leppings Lane end, Tommy BYRNE was among many now fighting for their lives.
I thought I was going to die, and I just accepted it, and I just said goodbye to everyone. My family, everyone I loved, everyone I cared for, and I just accepted that, you know, I was going to die. And then I heard someone shouting, and I couldn't make it out, and he was shouting down my ear, he was shouting, and it was, when I did, it was to lift your head up, and I said, lift your head up and breathe, and I did, and in that instant, everything come back. It was just a mass of noise, of heat, of pain, of not being able to breathe. The air was, it was breathing hot air. It was incredible.
5 minutes into the game, the ball's gone over into the crowd, and the ball doesn't come back for quite some time because nobody can get their arms up to even throw the ball back. So it was pretty horrendous. You steady think, well, hang on a minute, there's nobody in either the side sections and everybody's piling in through here, and you know, we've got to do something. So I said to the one policeman or policewoman, I said, could you do something about them? There's people getting squashed. And nothing was done because the game was going on. Everybody was full of themselves and they wanted to see the game. And they carried on, and the ball went behind the goal again, and I got very upset with the police person on the door, and I actually swore at them to open the gate.
Some of the fans, the police were trying to throw them back in because they thought it was hooligans, like, and the fans were wrestling with the police trying to make them aware of what was going on. People were dying, you know. And then suddenly it seemed to dawn on everybody, the police as well, and everyone started pulling at the fence, you know.
The game went on. Still the fans poured in, still nobody was stopping them, and still the pressure inside the pens continued its vice-like grip, ever tightening on the trapped Liverpool supporters. And then a crowd barrier collapsed.
Somebody had the foot up on my chest, and there was like two lads next to me, and this he was a young lad, because I could tell by his voice, a young lad, and all I could see was his foot was on my chest, and his arm was round these other two lads, so got hold of his arm, and he was shouting for his mum, like, you know, he's really panicking, screaming and that. And then there was this final crush, and the barrier collapsed behind us. This lad's foot just went down, and we all went over on him, and we sort of fell on top of him, and I could feel my knee across his sort of his shoulder and his neck and that, you know. It was that packed, I couldn't see his face, couldn't see his body, just his foot and his arm, you know. Almost sure, well, you know, when we went on top of him, he just went lifeless. And I just would have liked to know who he was. Could have told his mum and dad maybe, you know.
At 3:06, the game was stopped and the rescue began.
As I walked through one of the emergency gates, an inspector ran up to me and said, "Well, thank God you've come. We've got problems at Leppings Lane. I think there's a pitch invasion." And when I looked up towards Leppings Lane, I could see policemen helping people over the perimeter fencing. And it was obvious to me that it wasn't anything like a pitch invasion.
As we were filtering off, people had already come round, and they were crying, you know, grown men crying. You were in a helpless situation, because these are the fans that come to watch you perform and to bring joy to them. And yet, on this particular day, there was no joy on any face that came out of that.
An officer came to me and said he thought there were people injured and there were problems. I walked up to the perimeter fencing, and when I saw behind the advertising hoardings, I was absolutely appalled. And I turned to them and I said, "They're not injured, there's people dead and there's people dying here. Now, what are we doing?" And I then started to give directions to police officers.
My job initially was to do a very quick assessment of what was going off. I ran down the ramp and onto the pitch and up to the Leppings Lane end, and it was painfully obvious that there were some very, very serious injuries and possibly some fatalities. It became apparent that it was extremely difficult to get vehicles onto the pitch, because the wheelchair ramp had been placed on the approach and the vehicle wouldn't go through. And we managed to get one vehicle on that suffered some damage. I wanted to get the message across to the spectators that there was a serious problem at the Leppings Lane end of the ground. It also did another thing for us. It told the supporters where the resources were that were going to carry the injured. And in no time, people were tearing down hoardings and advertising placards and bringing people to us, because there were no way I could get the resources onto the field. Without the public assistance, we'd have never coped that day. And I honestly believe a lot of lives were saved because of that, because the public helped to get the casualties to where we were.
Brian Doyle had now climbed out of the adjoining side pen and onto the pitch, and was desperately trying to save people trapped behind the fencing.
I felt guilty for not trying to grab every one of their hands. It was like if they was all super glued. I grabbed this girl, I was pulling at her arm for about 4 or 5 minutes. I felt like 2 years. As I was dragging her up, she was screaming, "Get me out, please, get me out," and all that. Couldn't flinch her. She managed to turn her head, and I just felt all the strength going out of her.
We were faced with an immovable object, and that was the perimeter fencing. I saw a young boy who was trapped, and I managed to put my hands through the rails and lifted him hand over hand, and his feet got caught on the fencing. And I shouted to a sergeant, and he helped to release him. And all he was saying was, "Don't drop me, please don't drop me."
The pressure on those inside was now being relieved by the police directing fans at the rear of the pens back through the tunnel, and by fans at the front exiting through the small safety gate in the perimeter fence.
There was a surge of people from my left-hand side who seemed to make a charge for the gate. And when they charged for the gate with me, having my feet off the ground, I just got carried with them. But the horrible thing about it was the dead people were getting carried with us as well.
By now, Brian Doyle was becoming increasingly desperate in his efforts to save people's lives. Jumping down from the fence, he made one last attempt.
I ran back to the fence and started trying to pull the fence with my bare hands. This time there was like other people trying to grab the fence. But as he was putting your hands through the fence, the squares on the fence, to pull the fence, you know, he was like hitting people's faces that was jammed against the fence.
Tommy Byrne and Kenny Holmes escaped through the rear tunnel. Stephen Bell eventually got swept through the small emergency gate onto the pitch.
When I actually did get out into the pitch, I remember this young lad, it was must have been about 9, 10. He came up to me and said, "Can you help me find my dad?" And I said, "Well, your dad?" Like I said, "Where was he? Where is he?" He said he was in there, and he was right in the middle of where it all happened, so I felt sorry for him then. Like I was looking for someone to be sorry for rather than myself, like.
As the afternoon went on, the numbers started to go up and up and up, and it was frankly unbelievable. It was traumatic for me personally. I never in my life expected to see that number of fatalities under any circumstances. Just never believed it would happen or could happen, but it did happen.
"96 people died, 400 needed hospital treatment, and a whole community was devastated." Following the disaster at Hillsborough, the safety regulations at British football grounds were completely reappraised. Hillsborough, in common with many other clubs, removed its perimeter fencing. By the 1994-95 season, all Premier and First Division clubs will have all-seater stadiums. For Brian, the memories of that day still live on. Like many of the survivors, he underwent counselling to help him cope.
Well, it's been like 4 years from the Hillsborough and 3 years of counselling. Like, I am finally sleeping a bit better now. When I go out for a drink, which is not very often now, the people who associate with, you know, are still the same guy, makes them laugh at the jokes and, you know, funny remarks with them and all this. I said, but when I go home, like, and I'm alone, the thoughts of that day, maybe I'll keep them in private. I know they're not going to go away. It's just something I've got to try and live with the best I can.
The first 2 years after Hillsborough, I totally denied that anything was wrong with me, and that I ever suffered as much as I did, which led to psychological problems. My personality has just changed so much. The half an hour I was in there fighting for my life, and watched all these people lose the fight for their life, changed Stephen Bell forever. It's like I've aged so much in so short a time. Like when I say a sunny day now, I appreciate a sunny day. Because sunny days are there for the living. Death is indiscriminate, really, because I had no control over whether I was going to live or die. And I lived fighting for the same breath as the people who died were fighting for. To just totally give up on life would be an insult to the people who died in it, because they never had any choice whether they were going to give up on life or not. But here's me. I survived. And I've got the choice whether, all right, this is the beginning of the rest of your life. You either go down from here or you go up. And so, thankfully, I've got the ambition back to go back up.
I tried counselling, but that wasn't for me. So I thought the best thing I could do was to set myself these little targets, these little goals. Going back to a football match, getting back into a crowd again, going back to Hillsborough, and I achieved these, and I felt a lot better for it. I came to terms with it. Overnight when you're in bed and you're just drifting, it comes back sometimes to me, the images, the sounds, the noise. It's something I've got to live with. It's something I know that's always going to be with me. But it's something I've come to terms with. I've had to come to terms with, and life goes on.
And for Kenny Holmes, the memory of the young boy he couldn't save still haunts him. The counselling he underwent is only now beginning to have effect.
Once I got it off my chest, it was like a weight getting lifted off my shoulders, you know. I'd actually spoke to somebody about it. Somebody had told me not to feel ashamed about my efforts to try and save the lad, and not to feel ashamed about getting upset about it, you know. It was put home to me just what I had been through. So I started feeling not so guilty. I was in a situation where it was out of my control, where I couldn't help the lad. I'd failed, if you like. So my confidence went as well. But going through the counselling, you know, they made me realise that it's nothing I could have done. That did me best, and I know I did now. When I seen them people, the police included, and the average working man, ambulance men, even forest supporters and average working people, average human beings jumped in. People were jumping back into the crowd, the risk of their own lives to help. It takes something like a tragedy and a terrible thing to say, but people forget about themselves, forget about being selfish. And I was proud that day people jumped in, put their own lives at risk to help others.
It's something that you look back and you think, well, what effect has it had on people and long-term effect? But at least Liverpool will have, once a year, we'll have a memorial service for those people. We will always remember them, but we must understand that life has got to go on. We've got to look forward to the future and make sure that it never happens again.